Yeah, you're ruining my karma here, man. Gotta have everything in the right place. Let's see. All right, we got, you used to be in the afternoon, so you're gonna be just kind of bouncing back and forth, or you're gonna be AM from now on? Just, oh, okay. That's right, rub it in. Yeah, my neighbor was walking the dog. What's that?
If you want the rest of the day,
Are you guys, you're off for the rest of the day when you get down here, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Good. Yeah, my neighbor was walking her dog. She goes, "Oh, enjoy your time off tomorrow." I gotta work. Oh, sorry. We're gonna go play volleyball. That's just great. Yeah. That's fun.
That's not good.
That's terrible.
Everybody in my neighborhood's got the day off except for me, man. There's something wrong with this picture here.
That's just like walking up.
You can call sick.
Hey, how many months are you? I'm not pregnant.
Mike,
I've watched that
you
happen.
can call sick.
Me too.
No, I gotta teach. I can't call in sick. No one will teach the class.
They just told me that happened.
We are here for you.
You know, I thought about, ever since I got back from China, I haven't been feeling all that well. That'll get me some time off, at least 14 days, right? Quarantine?
14 days.
quarantined?
Oh, yeah. Well, that Princess cruise ship that was anchored off Okinawa, they just released them from 14-day quarantine and flew them back to,
Texas.
no, well, yeah, an Air Force base in Texas. Well, guess what? They got another 14 days of quarantine in the U.S. now.
Wow.
Some of them went to Texas, some of them
Yeah,
came here.
Yeah, some of them are here, some are, but they're going to be in another 14 days of quarantine.
It sucks.
So your 1 week cruise just turned into 28 days. I hope you got a lot of vacation time. So that's, yeah,
But it's better.
I guess. I'm gonna cancel my trip to China.
I'm glad I didn't buy my tickets to China. Remember that I was trying to buy those tickets to China?
Oh, you were seriously gonna go?
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Before this.
Before all this
I'm
mess.
sure you can get some cheap tickets now. We'll pay you to go there. We're running out of people to get sick. We need more.
Because people are crazy, they eat everything alive.
Yeah, there's a whole conversation going on about that. The wet market, the bat soup and all that, so, yeah. I don't feel so bad about ordering a cheeseburger now.
Yes.
All right, so, now we went through the bottom of the engine Wednesday, last week. So kind of got your hands on some things. So we'll go over and discuss most of that again today to kind of solidify the lesson from Wednesday. But before we get going, is there any questions that you have from Wednesday that are kind of eating at you want to ask now? And maybe it'll be something I'll cover in class, or maybe it's something I'll answer. So, no questions?
We're putting all that thing back together again, right?
Yeah, you're gonna have it done by next week. No, I'm kidding. You're coming in after work, you're gonna get that done for me.
It would take about 3 classes to do.
And then we're gonna put it in your bus. So do it right.
I like my bus right now.
Well, surprisingly though, just looking at it, those look like relatively new engines. They don't have a lot of runtime on them. So what I suspect happened was they failed in service and they needed the buses, so they rebuilt them. And then that zero emissions grant came around for the zero emissions engine, and those two got put on the list to be having the zero emission engines installed. So they rebuilt an engine, put minimal time on it, took it out. And for the grant, you have to destroy the engine. So they paid to have it rebuilt, put a bit of running time on it. The zero emissions program came around, so they took the fresh motor out, and it was going to be destroyed. But I got my hands on 2 of them. But it just, it's amazing that that's kind of wasteful, I would think, because it costs the company, I believe someone said about $9,000 to rebuild a motor. So in-house, I don't know what we pay when we have to have them rebuilt outside, which is usually I think CCW, but I'm quite sure it's more than $9,000. But that's higher up the pay grade than I am, so
Is that including labor for the person that puts it in?
yeah,
That's everything.
about $9,000 labor. So, and I mean, in the commercial engine world, that's not a bad price
Oh, okay.
because it's new parts. Now, it's an in-frame. Anybody know the difference between an in-frame and an overhaul? Go ahead, Chris.
Do it on the bus.
Yeah, the term comes from back in the day, the motor stays in the frame. Now, what are some disadvantages of an in-frame over an overhaul? And there's some big ones.
Crankshaft.
Yep, crankshaft, you pretty much can't really measure it as far as wanting to put a set of main bearings in it. You could roll a new set of whatever size the old ones were and hope it's still correct. Piston rods and rings come out, but you can't bore the block per se because you got the crankshaft in it.
The tippets too, they might fall out, because right here you had it inversed.
Yep. Yep, the cam followers usually stay in play. The camshaft can come out, and they do make a tray. Cummins makes some tools where you can slide a tray, you pull the camshaft out, and they have a tray that slides in where the camshaft goes, and then you can drop the tappets in there and replace the tappets, but that's just another step. But you can do that. But with an in-frame, you're limited on the amount of machining you can do. If the top of that block's not flat, then you could probably pay, I don't know if there'd be a portable machinist that could come out and flatten the deck with it in the bus. Probably not.
There was a guy in Long Island that used to come out, he had a van, and they would do that, but he would file the deck of the block by hand,
Oh,
which I thought was nuts. But he never had one come back though, as far as I knew.
yeah, but that's labor.
I know.
Oh my God. So, and there's been a
$900.
few in-frames that you get into the thing and you realize this thing's catastrophically failed. Now your in-frame just turned into now you got to take it out. So, but I mean, it has its place in the industry. If a cursory inspection indicates the crankshaft's still good, you don't have any oil pressure problems, then an in-frame buys you time. It can buy you 5, 6, 7 years before you got to discard the vehicle. So it's not that it's a bad thing. It's just there's some. Number one, an in-frame is a lot faster than an overhaul. It goes a lot quicker. Depending on the shop and the mechanic, you can do an in-frame in probably a week.
Yeah, because a lot of guys, they just pull the whole cylinder head and assembly in order to take all things off.
Right, they have in-frame kits. Cummins will sell you an in-frame kit. They'll have the pistons, liners, wrist pins, all the gaskets. And most of the time when you're doing an in-frame, the head goes out, the reman head comes in. And it's not a bad deal. It's not a bad deal. Okay, so we're going to talk about operation of the crankshaft, flywheel, vibration dampener, some important block measurements that you're going to want to take, cylinder liners, okay, basically the bottom end, okay, the bottom end. So a couple of weeks ago we talked about the top end of the engine, and that's responsible for what again? Breathing. Okay, now we're going to talk about the working end of the engine, the bottom end. So usually when you hear of an engine that's had the bottom end redone, you have to ask them, was it an in-frame or an overhaul? Usually when they say, well, we redid the bottom end, it's an in-frame. Because if it's an overhaul or reman, they'll tell you. It'll be in the advertisement or on the paperwork. And usually a vehicle that's had an in-frame is a little cheaper than a vehicle that's had the engine out and overhaul. Because that involves, if they do it right, that's a month. Because you'll spend the first week doing measurements. Okay, and we'll talk about those measurements and why they're important. Okay, so the crankshaft is what takes the up and down motion of the piston and turns it into a rotary motion. Okay, so this is how we get from up and down to rotary so we can get my transmission to work. Okay, now, true or false, the crankshaft is solid. False. It's got oil passages drilled in it so it can lubricate the main journals and the rod journals. It's also not hardened all the way through. It's only hardened down to a certain depth because that crankshaft has to be fairly malleable because in operation, and we'll talk about it a little later on, it's actually rotating at 2 different speeds. Okay? There's parts of that crankshaft that are going at different RPM, and I'll talk about how that happens and why here in a bit. Okay? So the crankshaft has rod journals and main journals in it. Okay? The main journals are where it rides out in the block. The rod journals are the connecting rods to it. So I want you to be able to understand how this thing works and understand its components. Okay. So when we get done today, you'll understand what I mean when I say your crankshaft is a 20/20 crank. That means it doesn't see well, it's not vision. So I don't put it on a bench and tell it to read the eye chart. Probably get sent down for a drug test if I did that. Okay, read the smallest line you can see. Who knows what I mean when it says a crankshaft's 20/20? Anyone want to take a guess? All right. Fine, don't talk. Okay. So we're going to be able to talk about that, understand how that works. Okay. So the group of components that make up the bottom end of the engine, of a block, obviously, crankshaft, cylinder liners, connecting rods, pistons, rings, wrist pins, bushings, all that sort of thing. Okay. And wherever you see a component, every one of these has associated measurements that go with it. Right? So what kind of measurements would we be talking about? So for instance, if I'm measuring the block, what's one of the things I'd probably want to check?
Flatness.
What's that?
Flatness.
Flatness. Flatness. If I'm doing a really poor job, or maybe I'm doing a rush job, okay? The guy brings a truck in and says, I need this thing on the road in 3 days. I'd be like, okay, get a tow truck. It'll be on the road. Okay. You didn't say it, but the guy said, I need it on the road in 3 days, so the guy will hurry up, throw some pistons on it, maybe buy a reman head, throw it on the block, put a head gasket on it, bolt it down, and send it out the door. The guy's going, okay, what kind of warranty are you giving me? None. Absolutely none. Well, why? Because I don't know, I mean, to be honest, if I were honest with my customer, I'd say, I don't know how long it's going to last. Because you didn't give me the time to do it right. I'm just being honest. You needed it done in 3 days, you got it done in 3 days. Okay, poor planning on your part doesn't necessarily make it an emergency on mine. Okay, but here you go. Now if it starts up and runs tonight, good. Taillight warranty. As soon as those go around the corner and I don't see them, warranty's up.
Yep.
I wouldn't warranty, especially if you're going back with used parts. Only put in it what it needs. I'd be like, okay, take it somewhere else. Okay? Well, aren't you going to give me a warranty? No, not at all. I'm not going to warranty somebody else's parts. Not a chance. Crankshaft. End plate's one of them, sure. What else?
Journal size,
Diameters.
taper.
Taper, out around, diameter. Is it undersized? Do I need to machine it? Cylinders, out around a taper. Connecting rods. Are they bent? Are they twisted? Are my wrist pin bushings good? Do I need new bushings? Did somebody put the wrong cap on it? And now my motor won't turn. Pistons. Oh, pistons got a lot of measurements. Roundness. Piston ring grooves. Are they deep enough, or did they get compressed? Are they going to walk up my ring? Piston ring gap. All kinds of things. Now these all measurements, they take time. They take time.
Piston to wall clearance.
What's that?
Piston to wall clearance.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
Exactly.
them for that.
Now, the block comes out of a foundry. Some engine manufacturers contract out to a foundry, some have it in-house. Okay? So they pour the block in a foundry, and it comes out, and everybody thinks, oh, it's ready to build. Far from it. Okay? Oil passages need to be drilled in the block to get the oil in the block to the rotating components. Okay? Passages have to be honed and finalized so I can put my cylinders in it, my crankshaft in it, camshaft in it. Okay. So there's a lot of things that need to be done on that. So once the block has been placed into service and you're getting ready to decide whether it's usable, can a block be not usable based on height?
You mean deck height? That can take it out of service.
Yep. Now how does my deck height change?
If it was warped and they milled it,
Yep. So you pull an engine out of a truck, you check the deck height, you come to the conclusion it needs to be milled flat. Okay. Well, you can only flatten it so much. Now, what tools do I use to check for flatness? Anybody remember? Straight edge and a feeler gauge. So I check the top of my block and I realize it looks more like a motocross course than it does a flat surface. And I got to take it to a machine shop and I got to have it milled. So they're going to mill it flat. Now, whether or not the machinist is going to check the deck height or not, it's not an assumption I'd make. Because he may not have the information as to how tall this block can be. He's just doing what you ask him to do. Okay? So engine manufacturers will have some method of measuring how tall their block is. Cummins has a tool that goes across the #1 saddle and measures the flatness of the block. Now, if the block is too short, what does that change?
compression ratio.
Yep. When you think, oh, it's a diesel, no big deal. Really? What happens if my compression ratio goes from 3/4 of an inch to 6/10 of an inch?
No power.
Well, okay, better answer, let me rephrase that. What, does that raise the temperature and pressure in the combustion chamber?
Yes.
Absolutely. Now, can that affect when and how the fuel burns? Yes. Okay, you might raise the compression ratio beyond the capacity of the clamping forces of the head bolts. You might shave so much off the block that the valves actually strike the pistons. Some pistons have reliefs in the head, in the top of the piston, to allow for the valve clearance when the piston comes up on the top of, let's say, the exhaust stroke and both valves are open for overlap, right? Okay, a lot of pistons will have reliefs cut in them so they don't strike the piston, okay, by design. Well, if I keep taking metal off the top of the block, that means the head's running lower and lower to the piston. At some point, the reliefs aren't going to be deep enough and bang. Yeah, the day is over. Okay, the day is over. Okay, so, and then pre-ignition. Right? It gets so hot the fuel lights off before it should, and there's no way you can control that. Your engine's going to try, the knock sensor is going to pick it up, and it's been constantly retarding the timing, and then you're like, this has got no power, it runs horribly bad, we just had it rebuilt, I don't know what the problem is. Anybody check the deck height? Huh?
Don't they have a different thickness head gaskets that aid?
Yeah, if I had a block like that, I was selling it, that's exactly what I'd do. I've heard of people double stacking head gaskets because they know this thing is defective and they've gotten too far into it to stop. So they'll double stack the head gasket, bolt it all up, and they'll go down and get the 495 for sale sign. It'll buy you, understand, we're not talking we're talking a few thousandths of an inch between go and no go here. And there's not one engine manufacturer on the planet that will recommend you double stack head gaskets. And they don't make, and I know where you're going with this, they don't make, oh, I need an oversized gasket because I got it too short of a block because I didn't check it. I'll tell you, you go to Cummins and ask that. As soon as all the guys get up off the floor from laughing at you, I'll call Leroy out there at Blooming and tell him you're on the way down. Yeah, no, they don't, but people will do that. They'll double stack the gasket, and that lasts not long at all.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It is, it's nuts.
I thought you could get them aftermarket like that, because I've heard about that too.
Yeah, in the automotive world.
Maybe in the automotive world, you can get a thicker head gasket to make up for,
Well, for power and performance too, you can change the,
well, if you put a thicker head gasket, you're lowering the compression ratio, because you're increasing the space between the bottom of the block and top of the heads. Now, where people do that?
Forced induction?
No, they go down to the junkyard and they buy a turbocharger for their Mitsubishi, because they didn't buy it with a turbo, and most turbos, automobiles will have a slightly lower compression ratio. Instead of 9.5 to 1, it might be 9 or 8.5 to 1. So they'll get the thicker head gasket,
Lower the
slop it on there, lower the compression ratio. But what they don't understand is the cam profile is different, the piston top and piston rings are different, and the fueling and timing curve in the computer is different. So by the time you buy all that stuff necessary to make your non-turbo a turbo, you should have just bought a turbo.
Be more reliable.
Yeah, plus it's probably got better cooling because it's got to do more heat rejection because of the extended heat. But hey, I mean, who am I, right? You want to throw that kind of money away, just toss a little in my pocket.
I called Comedic like 2 weeks ago about that, about getting a thicker head gasket. And
You
they
called
told me-
whom?
Comedic, they're a company that makes multi-layer steel head gaskets
Yeah.
and for performance application. And they told me that I could send them, if I have one that's intact or a new one from the stock engine, I could send that to them, and for $300 they would do both sides. They would custom make me gaskets to whatever thickness I like.
Well, most modern head gaskets are multi-layer.
Yeah, but they can make it whatever thickness you want. I thought that was crazy. I was like,
Why would you want to do that?
Well,
well,
old guy in the corner with an X-Acto knife.
That's going to be you on your retirement days. You'll have a new business,
Could be.
Frank's Gaskets. I've heard of it. I've heard of it back in my day, down in the 70s and 80s. People would just go down and buy 2 head gaskets and glue them together, right? With whatever, gasket cinch or glue, whatever adhesive, and put them on their car because they can't machine it or whatever. And I'm like, you know, you can do it the right way or you can do it.
Hey Mike, what were the gaskets made of back then? Leather?
That's about as old as I am. Well, back in the covered wagon days, we used lard or rope. Leather.
It's like the belt. The belt was leather.
Yeah, I remember those.
Yeah. Yeah, my grandpa's Model T had a leather belt on it. I've got a picture of him. I'll have it show you. He's standing there next to his Model T in Washington in the snow.
Oh, that's cool.
That's pretty cool. So back to the deck height, it's probably one of the least checked items. And then you get an engine together, right? They'll build the engine and they can't figure out why it's misfiring or why it's pinging or knocking. Now diesel would be less susceptible to it, but could still happen. Natural gas, oh man, it would have more of an adverse effect on a natural gas engine than I would think a diesel engine. Anybody know what the octane rating of natural gas is? Well, first off, let me back up. What is octane? What does that refer to?
Resistance to spark igniting?
Yeah, it's a rating of how well the fuel can stand up under heat and pressure. It has nothing to do with ignitability. So when you're down here at the Chevron station and you've got the 89, or no, what's the
Lowest?
87, 89, and 91. They'll all light off the same. It's just one will not be able to withstand as much heat and pressure as the others. Okay, so anybody want to take a gander at what the octane rating is on natural gas?
110.
It's about 120, yeah, 120. But still, you know, back to our problem with our block. You know, you shorten up that distance between the top of the piston and the bottom of the head, you raise the pressure and heat, you're going to have problems with that fuel. Even 120 octane, it's got its limits. Okay? So it's extremely important to check the deck height, because you're going to you could end up with, if it does run, elevated operating temperatures, higher exhaust temperatures, which would cause more wear and tear on your turbocharger and the rest of your exhaust components. to the point where you might be throwing exhaust temp related codes and still not have a badly running engine. Okay, so that'll give you something to troubleshoot for a while. So how would you troubleshoot this problem? And I've only heard it happening once. You have to troubleshoot it by eliminating everything else. Right? Your first thing would be check the record. Oh, it's got a in-frame recently done. Okay, so that should start. That should put a little buzz in the back of your brain housing group that And then you look and see how many times has that engine been in-frame on the original block. If it's got 2 or 3 in-frames on it, okay, or if the engine's been out of the block, out of the chassis and been rebuilt, and you see that it's been rebuilt and machined flat a few times, then you might consider this. And the way to check it would be pull a spark plug, bring the piston up to top dead center, and measure it. And if your clearance volume is below spec, then your deck height is probably incorrect. That's a you know,
It's probably
that's,
lower than what it should be.
yes, the measurement will be less than spec. You're right. The pressure would be higher. And the other way you could do it is put a compression gauge in it and spin it. They'll give you the compression ratio range. And if you're way above that, it's not that you got super great pistons. It's just squeezing it into a smaller space. Then you have to ask, well, why did the space get smaller? Well, let's see. The block just got machined. So these are things you'd have to. And this is something, you're the 9th guy to get this thing, and nobody else has been able to fix it. So you look at the work history, and like they've done this, they replaced all these parts, and we still have, you know, timing issues or whatever. Make sense? So that's exactly how you would check a block for flatness. Okay. So this, for example, if you're looking at an M11, I just happen to have an M11 manual open the other day. Okay. And it says for end to end, which is what he's checking here, end to end, front to back of the block, you have a 8/1000th of an inch spec. So if I've got my straight edge, and I can get an 8/1000th of an inch feeder gauge between the straight edge and the block, we're done. The block has got a warp in it. It needs to be machined.
That's a lot. The spec was 8,000?
Cummins is huge. I mean, they got hugely huge specs. You know? Big specs. Even if it was less than that,
Yeah.
I'd still flat that there.
Yeah, because I got a Mercedes engine that had 5,000 on it, and I didn't want to build it.
Yeah, yeah. So side to side, now this will make you happy. Side to side, if I go from here to here, 3/1000th of an inch max.
Yeah, it does.
Okay. So when you check these, you're going to go end to end, and then you're going to go side to side between the cylinders, and you're going to measure all of this to see if it's flat. Now, this is a disadvantage of an in-frame over an overhaul. If the block fails, the question is, do I continue? Or do I just pull the block out of the vehicle, strip it down bare, and send it off to the machine shop? Now, if I continue, put a little asterisk in the work order, head gasket issues, question mark. Because if I got a big divot in the block surface, right, on the top where it's supposed to be flat, is the head gasket stout enough to fill in when I go to compress it and seal the cylinders? Is there enough head gasket to fill in that slight recess? Huh?
Imperfection, yeah.
Imperfection. Now, there might be. There might not be. You won't know.
Well, that's the purpose of the gasket anyway, right?
Well, yeah, the gasket's designed for sealing, and it's designed for slight imperfections.
Slight.
So, what's your definition of slight?
Yeah.
Cummins says 3 grand or less, you're good. 3 grand or more, machine it, right? So here you are with the head off the block, and it's failed. What do you do? I don't know. Talk to your supervisor, put the monkey on his back. Right? That's what he gets paid the medium bucks for, right, Frank? If I get jammed up, Frank said.
Oh, Mike's there.
No, I'm not that high up in the totem pole, boss. No, sir.
Mike, do you know on these engines how much piston in the hole you have from the top of the liner, head, top, dead center? How much clearance do you have?
Between the piston and the top of the liner,
Yeah,
I've never checked it.
and the deck height,
It's pretty flush with the top of that liner.
is it? So there's not much you
Well-
can take off.
No, actually, I take that back. If you look at the piston liners on those engines, and that little rusty band around the top,
Yeah, the ring.
that's your compression area. That's your clearance volume between the top of the piston and the top of the liner. It's about 3/4 of an inch.
You can check it when you put it back together.
Yeah.
On the motors, do they have only one head with the same size combustion chamber? Like so, like, because on a gas motor, if you have more compression, you can get a head that has a bigger combustion chamber, so it changes the compression and make it lower. So on these motors, it's all the same head.
No, wait, that's performance parts.
I see.
Now, I'm sure somewhere, some guy, I know a guy, I know your guy, Fanny, can do that for you. Can machine the head and the, but that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. Why would you do that? You know?
It's cool.
Well, I mean, if you just want to throw a couple grand away, shit, I'll take the money and you can be cool all you want, man. But for me, being broke is not cool, right?
I know Chevy made heads that had different CCs as far as the head chamber.
Yeah, that's the measure.
That was their go fast goodie.
61 CCs, if I remember right, on the small block.
Yeah, that's their go fast goodie.
Uh-huh.
Their race department, their high performance department, whatever their aftermarket.
Cool
Sure.
how they do that with like liquid, they just fill up that, they'll flip the head over, fill it with liquid, and then suck it up into a syringe and like measure.
Yep.
And that's the simple,
But-
that's how they measure the CCs of that.
That's high performance parts. That's aftermarket usually.
Yeah.
Cummins won't do that.
Just one standard end.
Can we do one when we put it back together? Put the head over. CC it?
You got enough.
I got a little
We could-
syringe that we could use to measure it.
We could try, but because
Did you find it on the bus last night?
no, he was in San Francisco and it was laying on the street. They got a lot of them out there.
Found it next to a park bench. Don't
Yeah,
worry.
San Francisco's pretty bad when your dog's got to worry about stepping in shit.
Yeah.
I have a question. How often does that happen where you have to smooth out the?
Quite often. It's not unusual at all, especially if it's a high mileage motor. Okay, then it's not unusual at all that. Because if you think about it, so I got 26 bolts holding this head on this top of this block, and at idle 800 RPMs, right? A piston is fired, so I'm lighting off. I got a small explosion in a confined space, so that's going to cause the head to flex and stress, which then is going to clamp down against the block, and it's going to put pressure in not a uniform method across the block, so that's going to wear the block in various areas. So after a period of time of running it like that, the material's going to wear, and that's how you get that uneven surface.
How often does it get checked?
Good question. If the engine builder is competent, anytime the head's off the block, it should be checked. So, for example, let's say I've got a block coming in, or an engine coming in that's leaking coolant into a combustion chamber. So the assumption is the head gasket's back. Okay, so we pull the head, and the job is replace the head gasket. Well, the question from the mechanic should be, what caused the head gasket to fail? Is putting a head gasket on fixing the problem or fixing the symptom? Because that's not the same. The symptom is coolant in the combustion chamber. The problem is maybe the head's not flat. Maybe the block deck's not flat. Maybe neither one of them are flat. And simply putting a new head gasket on is just kicking the problem down the road.
And maybe the liner's bad.
Maybe a small.
I mean, yeah, there's all kinds of things. There's all kinds of things that could be south of this. The head's cracked, the liner's got an issue, yeah. So a competent mechanic would ask these questions and then get answers for them. Now, 9 times out of 10, well, not 9 times out of 10, quite often it's a head gasket issue. But many times it's the head gasket was taken out by an uneven surface, and so when the mechanic pulls the head, he's going to set it on the bench, measure the head for flatness, measure the block for flatness, because a good mechanic's going to want to know why this failed. And when I'm done with it, is it going to fail again? Right? And so when he comes up with a problem, well, the head needs to be machined because it's not flat. Then they'll just get another head or machine the one he's got, put it back on, and there'll be a high degree of certainty that we won't have this problem again. Versus pull the head, lift it up, sand the old head gasket, put the new one on, drop the head back down, bolt it up, send it out the road. How confident are you that that's not going to blow again and end up with water in the cylinder? Well, I don't know, I just changed the head gasket. Was that the problem? Maybe. So yeah, good mechanic, anytime the head's off, anytime you take the top end off, he's got to check it. He should check it.
Unless you got your manager rushing you.
Then,
That's true.
well,
Right.
if I got a manager wanting me to do a job incorrectly, I stop.
We just had him sign off on it.
Well, I'm going to say, yeah, you want to sign off on this, that you told me not to do this, and that when it goes out and blows on the road 6 weeks from now, that you'll own it and you'll be standing next to me in front of the man during the ash chewing, then that's fine.
Yeah, cool.
Okay?
You're my shield when we get in there.
Well, yeah, if you want me to do something that's not
We're gonna need a bigger shield.
pretty much. Okay? Now, so here's yet another measurement. You've got the bores in the block that are punched in at the time of the block's manufacture, and then they're going to be machined to their first diameter, which is called their standard diameter. Okay, so anytime you see something that says standard, that's what it was when they got done making it. Now, will it stay standard its whole life? Probably not. Okay? Because when I drop my cylinders in there and I run the engine, my liners, these guys, okay, although it's a tight fit, this thing's going to vibrate. Now, we obviously won't be able to see it nor hear it, but as it vibrates while it's running, it's going to wear in my parent board. So when I pull the liner out, I'm going to measure the hole to make sure it's round. And if it's not round, or if it's out of spec, then I've got to make it round again. So I'll punch the hole, I'll have it bored, and it will be bigger than standard. So that's called oversized. We good?
Yeah.
So when it's bigger than standard, now I have a dimension that I have to maintain between the liner walls and the block walls. Right? And so if I take material out of the block, I have to make the OD, the outside diameter liner, bigger. It's called an oversized liner. Because Cummins' inside diameter is not changing. It can't now for emissions. If they make this bigger, it may not be emissions compliant. So what they do is they keep the same ID, and number one, it's cheaper. Now I only have to make one size piston for this engine family. So if I remove 20 thousandths of an inch of material around the parent bore to get it round, I'm going to have a 20 thousandths of an inch thicker liner to maintain my clearance. So it's a 20 over liner. Make sense? So the bores need to be checked for taper, which is that's taper. Or if you're from the south, tapper. You got some tapper in your cylinder.
Yeah, they just replace it.
Okay? And they gotta be checked for out of round, or what they call sometimes run out. Out of round. You got some run out tapper in your bore. Geez, you got medicine for that? They do. It's called honing and boring. Okay? So, again, if I'm putting together an engine, and whether it's an in-frame or not, I'm going to check that. Okay? And I'm going to check it in several spots, as far as 12 and 6, 3 and 9. There'll be about 6 measurements to get a good picture of that board. How round is it, or how out of round is it? And I'm going to measure every cylinder. Okay. So when they machine the cylinders in the shop, okay, this is a boring machine at the foundry where the block is brought down on a belt and it's precision lined up with the tool. I use lasers now. It comes down, it's all automated. And then it moves to the next one. Moves to the next one. This is on a ram. It just comes down and punches the hole to the final size. Okay. So that hole is now, whatever the measurement is, they'll call it standard diameter. Okay? The standard diameter. And then if I go 10 or 20 over, 10 thousandths over standard, or 10 to 20 thousandths over standard. So now it's oversized. So now I gotta find, now I gotta buy, and you usually hear the term, okay, you need a set of 20 overliners. Oh, okay. So you take your block to the machine shop, you say make it pretty. So he'll machine all your boards, and he'll tell you what you need. Oh, we had to take 10 off your cylinders so you get a 10 overliner. Okay, so, and you know, a good machine shop will probably have the components there. You'll say, okay, I'm going to machine your block, and they'll ask you, do you only get the parts needed? So when you pick it up, I'll have the liners, I'll have the crankshaft, I'll have the cam outlet, and you're like, sure, less shopping for me. Okay. Now, this is what they call line boring, right here. So when the block comes from the foundry, okay, this hole will be roughly the size it needs to be to start. So it'll be done one of two ways. Now these caps, looking at this picture, look like they've already been cut initially and then bolted into place for the final line boring. So what the line boring does is it ensures all the holes are drilled in line with each other. They're all straight. Because if it's not straight, I'm going to side load that crankshaft. I'm going to put pressure on the sides of it, and it's going to break. Crankshafts don't like to be side loaded. They like to be straight. Okay. Is there not a chair for you?
No, I have.
Huh? Oh, you're just standing up because wait for it. He's standing up because I'm boring him. Thank you. I'll be here all week. That's perfect timing. He's my setup guy. Every good comedian's got a guy in the audience to set him up, right? Now, this is precisely why these caps have to be reinstalled in their original positions. Because once this line boring is done, it's not exactly perfect. There are always going to be slight imperfections. So once this is done, the imperfections are mated, for lack of a better term. This cap will always be married to that saddle because at the time of manufacture, these two components form the most perfect hole diameter and are in line with the next one. If I get these caps mixed up, this cap may not form a perfect hole, and number two, it may not form a hole perfectly in line with the one behind it. Well, how bad can it be? Bad enough where the crank won't turn. Literally. Okay? So this is why, number one, before you go in and start getting your brand new Milwaukee half-inch drive electric, just tearing things apart, next thing you got parts flying over the shoulder, okay? You gotta make sure these things are numbered. They should be from the factory, but if it's like today or Friday, oh, I got a 3-day weekend and he line boards, it's like, woo, I'm off Monday, and he forgets to punch the numbers on them. Not unheard of. And you're not paying attention and you just go in there with elbows and wrenches and start ripping and tearing. And then you go to reassemble it and you're like, oh, uh-oh. There's no caps, there's no numbers on these main caps. Well, Sparky, maybe you should have looked at it before you took it apart. Now, your ship is sinking, but it's not sunk. You can send the block out and have it rebored and then have to buy custom bearings. Woohoo! Explain that one to the customer. Or you buy another block. Right?
It'll be a lot more expensive.
No, actually it's cheaper to buy another block and send that to the machine shop and have it re-line board because now you gotta pay for custom bearings. So,
Is the block the most expensive part of the engine?
that's a good question. For example, a B series Cummins, the one in the Dodge trucks, you can buy a block, a used block, machine ready for use for about $550. You can buy a new block from Cummins, I think they're $1,500. So a piston kit for that engine's about, well, a rebuild kit for that engine's about $836. Okay, and then a head for that's about another $400. So yeah, it's a pricey, but it's not so much the price of it, right? If I'm doing an in-frame, right? So I've got this